Popper's falsifiability is a principle applicable to predictive theories. In other words, theories that make a prediction about how nature will behave. Freud predicting whether someone would be a neurotic, and every person is part of nature. And Einstein predicting gravitational lensing, how you could see a star behind the sun because the distortion of space-time caused by the sun's mass would bend the light. And that's how we verified the correctness of Einstein's theories. But these are theories that predict the behavior of nature, which is what science does. Science is in the business of predicting how nature will behave. Philosophy is not science. Philosophy, specifically a part of philosophy called metaphysics, meta being that which stands behind or above, and physics being the world as we see. What stands behind the physics? In other words, what is the thing that behaves? Metaphysics is in the business of making educated guesses about what nature is. Science is in the business of predicting how nature behaves. Metaphysics is being, isness, essence. Science is behavior, doing. And Popper's falsifiability criterion does not necessarily apply to metaphysics, because we are not, as metaphysicians, making predictions about how nature will behave. We are making educated guesses about what nature is. Is it purely quantitative, as materialists say, or is it mental, as idealists say? Having said that, obviously, nature's behavior, science, should inform metaphysical speculation. If you have a metaphysics that has an implication that contradicts a measured behavior of nature, then your metaphysics is wrong. That's all there is to say. It's over, right? It's over with, because metaphysics are supposed to capture reality, and reality is not supposed to adapt itself to one's metaphysics. That was scholasticism. We outgrew that a few centuries ago. Materialism as a metaphysics, materialism is not science. Science is agnostic of metaphysics. Materialism as a metaphysics makes assumptions that today are contradicted by science. For instance, an assumption of materialism is that physical entities have standalone existence, that they exist regardless of whether they are being measured.
Mm.
Today, from foundations of physics, short of some woo-woo theories for which there is zero empirical substantiation, like gazillions of new universes popping into existence every infinitesimal fraction of a second, for which we have not an iota of evidence, or the woo-woo hidden variables of superdeterminism, for which we don't have an iota of empirical evidence. Short of that, we have to acknowledge, after 40 years of repeated experiments with entangled particles, that physical entities do not exist prior to measurement. Whatever it is that you're measuring, it isn't physical, because physicality arises as a result of measurement. Now, back to the metaphor of the dashboard, that's not difficult to understand at all. If the airplane sensors are not making measurements, the dashboard doesn't show anything. And the physical world is the dashboard. Unless you measure, there is no physical world, because there's nothing to be shown on the dashboard. Does that mean that there is no world to be measured? Of course not. Of course there is a world out there. It just isn't physical. And therefore, materialism or physicalism is refuted by evidence. Another prediction. The information richness of experience must be completely grounded in the information richness of brain metabolism. Richer, intenser experience must mean a bigger variety of brain states, and not just random brain states, but coherent brain states, because you also have to explain the coherence and structure of experience as fully grounded in brain states. Yes. But there's a whole host of things that not only violate this, they go the other way around. Psychedelics produce the top three most intense and memorable and richest experiences of one's life. That's research by Johns Hopkins.
Yes.
And now, after 10 years studying them, we know that all psychedelics only reduce brain activity. They don't increase brain activity anywhere. Teenagers have learned that if you partly choke yourself and induce anoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain, you can trip without drugs. What does the lack of oxygen does to brain metabolism? It reduces brain metabolism, but you can have rich, intense experiences doing that. That's why teenagers do it, and every now and then one of them dies because it's a very dangerous game to play. Acceleration induced loss of consciousness. Pilots under training, in the period in which they are unresponsive and we think they are unconscious, when they come by, they report, and I quote, memorable dreams when there's no blood in the brain because they're being subject to 9Gs.
Yeah.
I could go on and on. There's a long list. So there are all kinds of scientific observations of nature's behavior that contradict either the presuppositions or the implications of materialism. And therefore, although materialism in itself is not a predictive scientific theory, it's a metaphysics, you must discard it because it doesn't stand up to empirical facts. So you can use science to inform metaphysics, to inform philosophy. But the moment you do that, you have to be consequential. You cannot apply this in a biased way, thinking that all of science fits with materialism. Actually, very little. Now, the last point I wanted to make on this question, you talked about the explanatory power. Explanatory power has to do with how well you can reduce a phenomenon. To reduce a phenomenon in this jargon for how can you explain that phenomenon in terms of something else, in order to be able to state that there is nothing to that phenomenon, but that something else doing this or that. That's explanation or reduction.
Yes.
There is an important sense, maybe the most important sense, in which materialism has zero explanatory power because it cannot account for the qualities of experience. That's the so-called hard problem of consciousness, which has led some materialists to the ludicrous, desperate move to say, well, consciousness actually doesn't exist. And if it doesn't exist, we don't need to reduce it. Consciousness is an illusion, which immediately backfires because to have an illusion, you need to be conscious. Consciousness is the one thing that is undeniable, but people find archaic, atrociously complex lines of conceptual reasoning to get themselves all tied up. And in order to be able to hand wave and say, oh, behind that mist of all kinds of conceptual complexity, there is something that saves materialism. Well, good. If you want to believe that, go right ahead. I, for one, think it's complete nonsense. It's the most ridiculous idea ever conceived by the human mind in philosophy or otherwise. So I think, yes, we should look into explanatory power, and we should look into the possibilities that empirical observations that are reliable may contradict the premises or implications of certain metaphysics. And we should discard those metaphysics if that's the case and leave on the running only those that cannot be discarded that way.